In the case of nuclear and in the case of other things, for example, high-speed rail, there are many aspects of infrastructure which are much more difficult to implement and build in the UK than in comparable European countries. And what's going on there? Is that a question of regulations? I think at
It,
one point you say that I can't remember whether it's a stretch of motorway or rail or something, that the um, regulatory questions, the planning documentation for it is 30 times the length of the complete works of Shakespeare.
yeah, this is so what you're referring to is a project that I'm a huge follower of because it's a cool project if it happens. So it's called the Lower Thames Crossing, and
Yes,
this
that's
is
the one.
a
Yep.
proposed tunnel that would go between Essex and Kent. And Essex and Kent are two of my favourite parts of the UK. I have a lot of family. I'm Irish. I've got a lot of family in Essex, and Kent is very beautiful, and it's kind of a very easy, beautiful place to visit from London. The Garden of England, some people call it. And more importantly, what this would do is link up the two biggest shipping ports in the UK. This would allow truck haulage to bring stuff from two different ports, Felixstowe and Dover. And that would be hugely beneficial to our importers and exporters. So from a trade point of view, it's a very important project. But it's also quite ambitious. You know, it would be the furthest point of crossing of the Thames. You know, historically, London is where it is because it was the lowest crossing point across the Thames when the Romans arrived and they built London Bridge. Now we have the Dartford crossing, which is a bridge further down, and the Lower Thames crossing would allow crossing even further down. So it's kind of interesting from that point of view. But as you say, it's been incredibly bogged down in planning applications. So yeah, the planning application so far runs to 360,000 pages, and the cost of the planning process has been £297 million. Now, to put that in context, Norway built the world's longest tunnel, actually built the longest tunnel for less than that. So we're spending more on planning than other countries are spending on actually building the project that they're trying to get built. But
Mm.
that's really just a one example. You know, the high-speed rail HS2 is sort of famously, notoriously expensive in the UK. You know, 4 times per mile the cost of a rail link in Italy that's similar, also high speed. 8 times per mile more expensive than a high-speed rail link that was recently built in France. And you know, even within cities, so Crossrail, which is now the Elizabeth line in London, which by the way is a marvel of engineering. You know, it's an amazing project, and it's as a sort of transit nerd, I love Crossrail, and I was talking to somebody visiting London yesterday with somebody I work with, and he was asking like, what should I do tomorrow? I'm in London, I've got the day to myself, and I was like, oh, you should take the Elizabeth line. It's really cool. And people thought this was funny because like to them the Elizabeth line is just a way of getting around. To me, the Elizabeth line is a triumph of engineering, and it's a beautiful line. But unfortunately, it's also the second most expensive metro ever built in the world. You know, a lot of the things that make it really cool at the stations are some of the most expensive metro stations ever built anywhere. And so partly the problem is regulation that makes it difficult to build things, but partly the problem is also that a lot of these projects are now being funded by central government rather than by local government or by private companies. Local government and private companies have a much stronger incentive to keep costs down than central government does. Central government is sort of a bottomless pit. You know, it's always talking about how broke it is, but people don't lose their jobs for overspending money in central government. You know, people get moved from one place to another. The incentives for overspending or the incentives to keep costs down are much weaker when it's a central government project than when it's a private company that will go bankrupt if they spend too much, or when it's a local government that, you know, maybe they'll get kicked out by their voters, or, you know, maybe the local government will go bust and it will be very humiliating for everybody and they will lose their jobs. And the consequence of that is that it's partly that, you know, you buy expensive hammers, or, you know, you get these expensive procurement things where things that should be cheap become expensive, and anybody who's been involved in a big project or witnessed a big project will know how that works, the cost inflation for even very trivial things. But it's also that they make decisions that don't reflect the true trade-offs involved. So the stations of Crossrail that I mentioned are indeed beautiful, but since they're so expensive, the overall project is much more expensive. Whereas when you look at a project like the expansion of Madrid's metro, which was done very cheaply in the 1990s and the 2000s, and then other lines added since, they did very, very pragmatic things about stations. For example, the designs of most of the stations are just the same. They're just cookie cutter designs, and they've managed to keep costs down by doing that. There are lots of other decisions that they made. And ultimately, they didn't try to do best in class. They tried to do something that was good and would do the basic job of getting people around and would do it at an affordable price. And I think I don't necessarily think we always want to do the cheapest sort of bog standard thing, but I think that right now we never do that, and we never make any decisions really related to keeping costs down. And so cost rise, that means that projects sometimes just get cancelled, because that's kind of the only mechanism that central government has to stop spending money, is to just say you can't do this anymore. And when we do build things, they become incredibly expensive. And because they're so expensive, we don't get to build more of them. And that's the key problem. It's not just about wasting money. It's that the projects end up becoming so expensive that we can't do, Crossrail 2 or HS3 or, the second stage of HS2. And so, it's when we talk about costs, I think it would be a mistake to think of this as primarily about a waste of money. I mean, it is a waste of money, and wasting money is really bad. This is people's actual money that they've worked hard for, and we're taking. But if we were taking that money and spending it in a cost-efficient way on brilliant new railway lines or brilliant new roads and things like that, then I think that would be a much more reasonable ask to make of people. But we're both taking the money and spending it very irresponsibly, and because of that, we're not able to build more things, and so we end up with too little infrastructure, and that is a very, very big problem, especially when you are in a part of the country. London has amazing infrastructure, to be fair to it. London, has world-class railways, metro line. The London Underground, in many ways, is one of the best metro lines in the world. It's very old, so it's a bit, dirtier and more cramped than more new metro lines, especially in East Asia. But it's very extensive. It carries huge numbers of people every day. And what it does is allow people from, places like Essex to get jobs on the other side of the city. And so it expands the labour market and expands the pool of jobs people can take. And that means people can get better jobs, they can improve their skills, they can earn more, and the overall economy can become more productive. And when you look at other parts of the country, like Birmingham is really, in most ways, the UK's second city, but it has far worse infrastructure than London does. And so you end up with places that are actually, as the crow flies, much closer to the centre of Birmingham than parts of London where people would commute from. In Birmingham, those don't really have reliable connections. So there aren't really reliable ways of people getting from point A to B because of congestion, because there aren't railway links, whatever it might be. And so, while infrastructure for London is really nice, and, I think London should get bigger, and I think infrastructure would make it better, for places like Birmingham, for places around kind of Sheffield, Manchester, Liverpool, and so on, where they have far worse transit links, you actually get much less economic development and much less kind of labour market sophistication, because people are trapped in the places that they are that they live, and they can't commute easily to better jobs in other parts of the kind of urban area. So infrastructure is great for London, but infrastructure is vital for other parts of the UK.
We've also just done a best-in-class, beautifully designed metro here in Sydney, which I'm sure was immensely expensive. And although Sydney has some very beautiful forms of public transport, like the ferries, which everyone adores, and also has the advantage of it being extremely easy to get to the airport by public transport, very easy and fast. But nevertheless, it's not a terribly well-connected city, and we spent a lot of money putting swanky new metro stations where we already have train stops, actually.
Interesting. It's and it's true.
I love the metro. It's beautiful, but I'm also mindful of the same kind of trade-offs that you're talking about there.
I think it is a trade-off question, as you say. This isn't to say that we should never build anything beautifully. I'm a big believer in, as a recent guest of yours was talking about, I'm a big believer in beauty. I think that public beauty is very important. I want to live in a beautiful place, but I also want us to be aware of trade-offs. And would I rather Crossrail, the Elizabeth line, had stations that were still beautiful, but beautiful for a quarter of the price, rather than the most incredibly avant-garde, most incredibly amazingly designed kind of architectural marvels that we have. Yeah, I think I'd probably prefer the slightly cheaper one, and I'd like to have a second Crossrail with
Yeah.
still beautiful, but and actually we probably don't need to get into this here, but it just isn't the case that spending more money gets you the most amount of beauty. It can also mean that you're just spending money on what an architect considers to be beautiful, or what an architect considers to be challenging, or kind of progressive from an architectural point of view, but to a normal person is actually kind of neither here nor there. And the Madrid Metro, I'm not going to claim that the Madrid metro stations are beautiful. They're like pretty utilitarian, but that they're not bad. And they make decisions around using tiles and things like that actually give them that they feel quite good to be in. So it isn't just a pure trade-off between beauty and money. And a lot of the beauty question actually relates to housing, where I've spent more than a decade talking about the need for more housing. And one of the, I think, really important factors in both what we should be building and how we should be getting it built is beauty. And in recognizing that people want to live in a beautiful area, that people are very, I think, kind of reasonably averse to the idea of tower blocks going around them, but are much more accepting of what friends of mine call gentle density, where you build up to, say, 6 or 7 stories, you build townhouses, you aim for a sort of mid-rise type building, and you do it in styles that are, in the UK, quite historic. So Georgian styles, or Victorian or Edwardian styles that are very beautiful, that most of the most popular parts of London are built in these styles. And they also happen to be very dense. That's what's so cool about them, because it's a mistake to think that density equates to tower blocks. You can get a lot of people in a much more livable way with these kind of mid-rise type developments. And I think that getting there, that when we're talking about, we've talked about energy, we've talked about infrastructure, when we talk about housing, I think housing is overwhelmingly an incentives problem, where there are a lot of people who would like new housing to be built because it costs so much and because the shortage of housing stops them from getting better jobs. And there are also a lot of people on the other side who want to protect the nature of their area and want their area to be beautiful and livable, and they want it to be like what they expected when they bought their home. And I disagree with the formulation that some pro-housing people have, that this is a kind of an irreconcilable problem and that we have to just override the latter group in order to satisfy the former group. I actually think we can make these decisions win-win, and we can make it so that new housing enhances the quality of an area if we build it beautifully and if we build it in sympathetic styles that people actually want. And so, when we talk about beauty, it sounds sometimes quite abstract, but when we think about, I'd like to live in an area that looks nice, I'd like to live in an area that feels historic, or that is historic or built in historic ways, if we could offer that as, yes, we are going to build more housing in your area, and you get to have a say in that. And the reason that we think you want to say yes is that we're going to make your area more beautiful and more livable, and that we'll bring more services to your area. That's, in my opinion, how we might be able to unpick what seems like an irreconcilable tension and make housing something that people actually say yes to, rather than something that we have to override people's opposition to.